My little corner of suburbia, tucked away at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, was supposed to be a haven of tranquility. Lush green lawns, meticulously manicured hedges, and the gentle hum of lawnmowers on Saturday mornings, the quintessential picture of suburban bliss. Until, that is, Thursday mornings arrived. Thursday was trash day, a day that morphed from mundane routine into a weekly exercise in frustration and simmering rage. It wasn't the collection service itself that was the issue. No, the problem was far more personalized, far more Karen. Every Thursday, without fail, my trash bin would become a casualty of some inexplicable vehicular assault. I'd dutifully wheel it out to the curb the night before, ready for the early morning pickup. But by the time I returned from work, the scene would resemble a small-scale demolition derby. The bin, once a perfectly serviceable receptacle for household waste, would be lying on its side, crushed, cracked, or sometimes even scattered in pieces across my lawn. The first couple of times I chalked it up to bad luck, carelessness, perhaps even some wayward teenager joyriding in the early hours. Accidents happen, I reasoned. Maybe the sanitation truck was having a particularly bad day. But after the third incident, a nagging suspicion began to take root. This wasn't random. This was targeted. My suspicion solidified when I invested in a security camera, simple, relatively inexpensive device that promised to bring peace of mind. Little did I know, it would instead bring a face to my frustration. Karen Woolridge, the self-appointed queen bee of the Homeowners Association. The camera captured her in all her glory, piloting her silver Lexus SUV like a battering ram. Thursday morning, she'd make her grand entrance into the cul-de-sac. Without so much as a flicker of brake lights, she'd plow directly into my trash bin. It wasn't a glancing blow, a near miss, or a simple clip of the side. This was a full-blown, intentional assault. She wouldn't even slow down, the Lexus roaring past, leaving a trail of plastic shrapnel in its wake. It was almost comical in its brazenness. If it wasn't happening to me, Karen Woolridge was a force of nature, a walking, talking embodiment of suburban entitlement. Her appearance was as predictable as her weekly trash bin demolition, eternally tanned skin stretched taut across her face, artificially enhanced blonde hair coiffed into an immovable helmet, and designer sunglasses perched permanently on her nose even on overcast days. She was the type of woman who believed the world revolved around her, that everyone else was simply an obstacle to be navigated or, in my case, run over. She was also the president of the HOA, which, in our community, meant she wielded an almost terrifying amount of power. Her word was law, her opinions gospel, and her wrath something to be avoided at all costs. And now, apparently, she was waging a one-woman war on my trash bin. The question was, why? Initially, I attempted the logical, reasonable approach. I was, after all, a civilized human being most of the time. I crafted polite, yet firm notes expressing my concern about the repeated incidents and politely requesting she be more careful. I left these notes tucked under her windshield wiper, always careful to choose stationery that wasn't too accusatory, but also not too passive. The first note went unanswered. The second disappeared, presumably tossed into the nearest trash receptacle, hopefully not mine, post-attack. The third, I decided, needed a more direct approach, so I brought it up at the next HOA meeting. The meeting itself was a spectacle of petty grievances and thinly veiled power struggles. Landscaping disputes, parking violations, and the never-ending saga of Mr. Henderson's overgrown rose bushes dominated the agenda. When it was my turn to speak, I framed the issue delicately, avoiding direct accusations. There have been some, shall we say, incidents involving my trash bin being damaged? I began, my voice carefully neutral. I'm hoping we can find a solution to prevent this from happening in the future. Karen, naturally, was present, sitting at the head of the table, her expression one of bored disdain. When I finished speaking, she finally deigned to acknowledge my existence. Perhaps, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, you should take your trash out faster. It wouldn't be an issue if you weren't cluttering the street with unsightly plastic. I was taken aback. Her response was not only dismissive, but also completely illogical. The bins were placed out the night before, well within the designated time frame. It had nothing to do with how quickly I took them out. It was clear she was deliberately avoiding the issue and, frankly, being incredibly rude. In a final attempt at appeasement, I offered to move my bins closer to the curb, hoping to minimize any perceived inconvenience she might be experiencing. "I'm happy to adjust their placement," I said, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "Perhaps if they're closer to the street, they'll be less obstructive." Karen's response was even more infuriating. "If you don't like it," she snapped, "you should move. This is a perfectly well-managed community, and we don't need you causing problems." That was the turning point. The moment I realized that reason and diplomacy were futile. I had tried playing nice, attempted to find a compromise, and been met with nothing but arrogance and hostility. It was clear that Karen wasn't interested in a solution. She was enjoying this. She was using her position to bully and intimidate me, and I wasn't going to stand for it. The gloves were off. It was time to fight fire with fire, or, in this case, steel with Lexus. The passive approach had failed miserably. It was time for a proactive solution. A solution that would not only protect my trash bin, but also send a clear message to Karen Woolridge: don't mess with me. The wheels began to turn in my mind, ideas began to form, and a plan, a rather audacious plan, began to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be cheap, but it would be satisfying. Very satisfying. The decision was made. I was going to build the ultimate trash bin, an impenetrable fortress of refuse disposal. Forget flimsy plastic and easily crushable materials. This would be a trash bin worthy of a military parade, a monument to suburban defiance. The mission began with research. Hours were spent online, poring over schematics, material specifications, and even military surplus websites. Needed something strong, something durable, something that could withstand the onslaught of a silver Lexus driven by a rage-fueled HOA. I started with the interior. The standard plastic bin was, of course, completely inadequate. It would become the mere shell of the true behemoth. I needed a reinforced steel frame, something that could absorb the impact and distribute the force. I sourced heavy-gauge steel, tubing from a local metal supplier, meticulously welding together a cage-like structure that would fit snugly inside the existing bin. It was a labor of love, fueled by equal parts ingenuity and righteous anger. Sparks flew, the garage filled with the acrid smell of burning metal, and slowly but surely, the frame began to take shape. Next came the casing. I wanted something that looked relatively normal, at least from a distance. A trash bin shouldn't exactly scream weaponized. So I decided to encase the steel frame in a layer of hydroxyl polyethylene, a tough, impact-resistant plastic that would at least give the illusion of normalcy. It wouldn't offer much in terms of protection, but it would serve as a camouflage, disguising the true power lurking beneath. Sourcing this plastic proved to be a bit of a challenge. But after a few phone calls and a trip to a plastics recycling plant, I managed to secure enough material to complete the job. Then came the fun part, the military-grade casing. I scoured surplus yards and online auction sites, searching for something that could provide the ultimate level of protection. I eventually stumbled upon a listing for a decommissioned military storage container. Designed to transport sensitive equipment, it was made of thick, reinforced steel, virtually indestructible. It was the perfect outer shell for my armored bin. Getting it home was an adventure in itself, requiring a rented trailer and some serious muscle. But once it was in the garage, the project truly took on a life of its own. Cutting the container to size, welding it to the steel frame, and integrating it with the polyethylene casing was a complicated and time-consuming process. But with each step, I felt a growing sense of satisfaction. This wasn't just a trash bin anymore. It was a statement, a declaration of war, albeit a somewhat passive-aggressive one. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted to add a little, something extra. A final touch that would truly surprise Karen and deter her from any future vehicular assaults. That's when I came up with the idea for the electrical shock panel. The electrical shock panel was admittedly a bit over the top, but I couldn't resist. It was the perfect blend of ingenuity and petty revenge. The idea was simple: a low-voltage electrical circuit that would activate upon hard impact, delivering a harmless, but extremely unpleasant shock to anyone who came into contact with the bin. I wasn't aiming to cause serious injury, of course. Just a jolt sufficient enough to discourage any further attempts at vehicular manslaughter of my trash receptacle. I sourced a low-voltage transformer, a capacitor, and a few strategically placed metal plates from an electronic supply store. I wired the circuit carefully, ensuring that it was properly insulated and grounded to prevent any accidental shocks. I even added a safety switch that would deactivate the circuit, just in case. The metal plates were discreetly embedded in the polyethylene casing, almost invisible to the naked eye. They were positioned to maximize contact with a vehicle's bumper, or, if necessary, a person's leg. The whole system was powered by a small, rechargeable battery hidden inside the bin, easily accessible for maintenance. The final product was a marvel of engineering, Frankensteinian creation of steel, plastic, and electricity. It looked like a normal trash bin, albeit a slightly larger and more robust one. But beneath the surface lurked a formidable defense system, ready to repel any would-be attackers. With the armored bin complete, I waited for Thursday. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I could barely sleep the night before, my mind filled with images of Karen's Lexus colliding with my creation. I rolled the bin out to the curb early Thursday morning, a grin plastered across my face. It stood there, a silent sentinel, waiting for battle. I set up my security camera, making sure it had a clear view of the action. Then, I retreated inside, grabbed a cup of coffee, and settled in to watch the show. And just like clockwork, she arrived. Karen Woolridge, in her silver Lexus, barreling down the cul-de-sac like a woman possessed. She didn't even slow down. She was completely oblivious to the trap I had set. This was going to be glorious. Boom. The collision was even more spectacular than I had imagined. The Lexus slammed into the armored bin with a deafening thud. But this time, the bin didn't crumple. It didn't even budge. Instead, it was the Lexus that bore the brunt of the impact. The front bumper crumpled inward, the headlights shattered, the hood buckled. The electrical panel activated instantly. The car lights flickered erratically. The alarm system shrieked to life. Smoke began to curl from under the hood. A symphony of automotive suffering. Karen jumped out of the car, screaming obscenities. Her mascara was running down her face, her hair was a mess, and her tan looked even more orange than usual. She was in full Karen mode, ranting and raving about sabotage and demanding that I pay for the damage to her precious Lexus. Then, she made a fatal mistake. Fueled by rage and a complete lack of foresight, she kicked the bin.zap. The electrical shock panel delivered its payload. Karen let out a blood-curdling scream and collapsed to the ground, twitching uncontrollably. Her hair stood on end like she had stuck a fork in a toaster. She lay there, stunned and humiliated, her HOA issued, clipboard lying uselessly beside her. I couldn't help but laugh. The plan had worked perfectly. The scene was chaotic. Smoking Lexus, a crumpled bumper, a twitching HOA president, and a trash bin that looked remarkably unscathed. It was the kind of tableau that could only exist in the suburbs. I knew I had to act quickly, while the urge to simply stand there and bask in the schadenfreude was strong. I knew the situation required a degree of adulting. I calmly walked outside, pulled out my phone, and dialed the non-emergency line. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, carefully omitting any details about the electrical shock panel for now. I simply stated that Karen Woolridge had repeatedly damaged my property and that today she had finally collided with my trash bin. The police and fire department arrived within minutes, sirens blaring and lights flashing. The officers surveyed the scene, their expressions a mixture of confusion and amusement. They approached Karen, who was still lying on the ground, groaning and clutching her leg. "Ma'am, are you all right?" one of the officers asked, his voice laced. With concern, Karen, still clearly disoriented, began to rant about sabotage and how I had booby-trapped the street. She accused me of intentionally damaging her car and demanded that I be arrested. The officer turned to me, his eyebrow raised. "Sir, can you explain what happened here?" I calmly recounted the events of the past few months, describing the repeated damage to my trash bins and Karen's refusal to take responsibility. I showed him the security footage, which clearly documented each incident. He watched in disbelief as Karen's Lexus plowed over my bins, week after week, with malicious intent. He saw the tire tracks in the grass, the broken pieces of plastic, scattered across my lawn. He even saw the notes I had left on her windshield, politely requesting her to be more careful. Karen tried to interject, claiming that the footage was doctored and that I was fabricating the entire story. But the officer wasn't buying it. He examined the tire tracks, compared them to the Lexus's tread, and ran the license plate. "Everything checked out," the officer said, his voice firm. "You've been committing property damage for 3 months straight. This man just made a smarter trash can." The officer then asked if he could inspect my smarter trash can. I reluctantly agreed, knowing that the electrical shock panel was about to be revealed. I explained the purpose of the circuit, emphasizing that it was designed to be harmless and only intended to deter further damage. The officer examined the panel, tested the voltage, and confirmed that it was indeed low-level and non-lethal. He seemed more impressed than concerned. "Ingenious," he muttered under his breath. It was at this point that things took an unexpected turn. During the investigation, the officers discovered something that Karen had been desperately trying to hide. It turned out that she had been billing the HOA for repairs to her Lexus, claiming that the damage was caused by potholes and debris in the neighborhood. She had submitted over $9,000 in fraudulent repair bills, all conveniently timed to coincide with her weekly trash bin demolition derby. The jig was up. The revelation of Karen's fraudulent activities sent shockwaves through the HOA. The other board members, who had long been intimidated by her domineering personality, were furious. They called an emergency meeting and, after viewing the security footage and reviewing the evidence, voted her out on the spot. She was banned from any leadership role in the community indefinitely. To add insult to injury, Karen's insurance company refused to cover the damage to her Lexus. They considered it intentional vandalism, since she had clearly been targeting my trash bins for months. The Lexus was totaled, and Karen was left with a hefty repair bill and a severely tarnished reputation. The aftermath was glorious. The entire community breathed a collective sigh of relief. Karen's reign of terror was over, as the HOA was finally free from her petty tyranny and her penchant for micromanaging every aspect of suburban life. Now, Karen walks to the HOA meetings, a humbled and chastened figure. She no longer drives her silver Lexus, and she certainly doesn't park in front of my house. Every Thursday, she has to roll her own trash bin out to the curb, just like everyone else, and mine. My armored, electrified trash bin, it's still standing, strong, a symbol of suburban resilience and a testament to the power of ingenuity and righteous anger. Sometimes, I even catch Karen crossing the street to avoid walking near it. She gives it a wide berth, her eyes darting nervously in its direction. The cul-de-sac has returned to its former state of tranquility. The lawns are still meticulously manicured, the hedges are still perfectly trimmed, and the only sounds are the gentle hum of lawnmowers and the occasional chirping of birds. Thursday mornings are no longer a source of anxiety and frustration. They are now a source of quiet satisfaction.